So how did you end up in Savannah though?
Savannah was the first place I chose to work. I used to get sent around to the different projects, so I was on larger projects. So they'd send me where the work was. So I was really nowhere longer than about 6 months to a year. And my grandmother had just moved to Savannah, and so I wanted to be close to her. And so there was a company I was working for. They sent me down to Jacksonville to build a hospital before they'd let me come to Savannah, but then I got to be there, and I moved there in 2018.
Yeah, did you always want to be in commercial construction when you were younger?
Oh yeah. I grew up, so like all my aunts and uncles, and they worked in construction. So we were all kind of a union family. And so I was always running around job sites when I was younger, or like bothering the mechanics in the shop. I knew I wanted to work in construction.
What was your first job in construction?
I was a laborer. I was low man on the totem pole, the little gopher. So like I would sweep the dust back into the trenches, because we were doing sewer and water main construction for a long time. If they needed something from the trailer, because like our trailer has all of our equipment in it. So if they needed like a pump or a hose or something, they'd be like, hey kid, go get that. And so I'd run and get it for them, because I was on site before I could drive. So
wow.
Yeah.
So what did your kind of trajectory look like in your career in construction?
The company I worked for, that's where my aunt also worked. They sort of figured out I was good with numbers. So that's where they had me kind of doing more kind of like assistant project management type stuff. Like they sort of realized I was smart, so I could be utilized in that way. I was managing our trucking company by the end of it. So I was there monitoring their bills. So I would be out there. So I'd help on site. Like I was there to work if I needed to, but I'd also be taking all their tickets, because the trucks would take dirt away and then come back with stone or clean fill dirt to fill the trench back up, because we had to subcontract that out. We couldn't do it internally. So then I'd get their bills and I'd check those bills against that. And that was kind of my foray into project management.
Where did it go from there?
From there, so that company ended up buying what you call is cured in place pipelining. I won't go too far into it because I'll be there for a long time if I do. But that company bought a cured in place pipelining company, which is a much more economical means of rehabbing sewers and water mains. And so I ended up running that company because we had smaller crews. So the larger company, I got separated from that I was like the director of operations, I think they called it, for that company.
So you went from labor to running operations of a company over how many years of experience did you have at that point?
That was like six years.
So what's that like, being in that position where you have all that responsibility at a fairly young age?
I was relieved. Are you kidding me? I'm very particular. I kind of more type A professionally, where I like things done a very particular way. So to have that sort of control and be able to do things the way I wanted to, oh, I loved it. It was like the greatest thing. I worked at least 80 hours a week, but then wow. I loved getting into like I figured out how to track costs. That was something that this smaller outfit wasn't really doing. So like I built, Excel spreadsheets, just sort of taught myself how to really be a project manager and what it means to run a business. So I got to kind of figure it out on my own. And let my curiosities kind of take me where I wanted to go, because the work was getting done. So like from building a business perspective, it was really cool to get to, build all those spreadsheets for certain contracts. We had different like submittal information. So I got to like build that and learn how to organize things on the front end, so you'd have a really successful project execution.
So throughout your career in construction, in commercial construction, did you have like a niche or specialty, or was it a wide variety of different projects that you had worked on?
So I went into building with the goal and the aspiration to touch every single kind of construction that there is, so that I always knew I wanted to go off on my own. I obviously wasn't sure how it was going to play out. I just knew that was going to happen one way or another. So I never wanted someone to bring me a set of drawings that I didn't know how to build. So I very intentionally stayed away from being a specialist and stayed a generalist for that reason. So even when I worked for a company that did warehousing. So 90% of our PMs and superintendents were building big boxes, which are very basic. Like I built one and I was like, you got to help me out here, man. This is boring. So that was where I ended up growing a medical marijuana grow facility in upstate New York. That was fascinating. So it wasn't recreationally legal in New York when we built this building. And this was also when the banks weren't accepting money from these operations. And it was a publicly traded medical marijuana grow, like a medical marijuana company. So our first payment, which was like $500,000, came in a briefcase full of cash. I'm not joking. It was hilarious.
Wow. So you've worked on a bunch of different types of projects.
I built, it's actually cooler than building a hospital. So I put a bed tower on top of an existing operating emergency department. So we had built the emergency department 7 years ago and structurally had put steel members that would allow for this bed tower expansion, but we still had to cut into the roof, and it was the only trauma center in Jacksonville. So like we'd have to stop our tower crane to have helicopters land to take trauma patients, because we were the only one. We had this whole scaffolding system around the ER entrance so that people could go in and out. In this stairwell we built, we're placing a staircase next to an operating room. It was unbelievable. But then I built a sanctuary at the Cathedral Basilica in downtown Savannah. It's the Cathedral Basilica of St. John the Baptist. And that was one where we were literally gearing up to go to Portugal to like pick out the stone, like the block of stone that was going to go down in the basement. And got to work with like trades who did the vaulted plaster ceilings, and then the portraiture, like the actual that you would see in a church, like the actual painters that do that. So it was fascinating.
Wow.
So like all across the board, not a specialist.
And Donnie, I want to get you in here. You're a numbers man. What's your background?
Yeah. So went to college, ended up studying business, dabbled in marketing for a little bit, lived in South Beach in Florida, had some fun there with an experiential marketing company. Realized it really wasn't what I wanted to do, and then hopped into the banks. So got my first job in more of a rotational program, got to see how a lot of the different areas function, learned a lot around just kind of the building blocks, and learned a lot of what I don't want to do if I was to eventually run a company. My family is filled with entrepreneurs. So needless to say, that was always kind of in the back of my mind of how do I get to the end of that path. Worked my way up the ladder in the banks, spent some time in strategy groups, tech, like business intelligence, now payments and deposits for one of the larger banks. And really everything that it's taught me is how to take either budget the large organization, a large group of people, and try to coerce them into doing things that matter. And really, when we started talking about this possibility of buying a company, it was so exciting because coercing a small office versus trying to get thousands of people to work toward a common goal, very different. And it's much nicer to have a larger impact, so it was always very enticing.